Thank you very much, Karen. And it's a great honor to be back here. This is my third visit to Park Cities Rotary, so very happy to be here. What I want to do is, I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to give a summary of what we've done over the years, just to bring you up to date. Many of you heard talk before, so this will be old news. But what I want to do is spend most of the time looking at one aspect of the new information that has just been coming out. You can't read the top of that. Anyway, it says what caused 25% of the troops in that war to come back with a chronic illness, which is quite a remarkable thing. So I want to talk about what caused it, because we now know and we have proved it. So I will show you that. Before I start, though, I want to give just a couple of minutes on the issue of the West Nile encephalitis epidemic we had last year and what may be coming this year, because I want to take every effort to try to inform the people of Dallas, because we're going to have some decisions to make here that will be life and death for some of our friends and neighbors. West Nile encephalitis is caused by a virus, the West Nile virus, that is spread by mosquitoes. Mosquitoes bite birds, and the birds become infected, and then other mosquitoes feed on them, and that's how it's propagated in nature, birds and mosquitoes. So you first have an epidemic in birds, and an epidemic in mosquitoes, which is beginning right now. In fact, this morning's paper, you probably saw that the Richardson mosquito surveillance has just picked up the first 4 positive mosquitoes of the year. That's early, and that's not a good sign. Last year it was early. It started in May, and we had the biggest outbreak in the country, the second biggest in the world in history. We had, in the 4-county area, we had 30 deaths and over 4,000 people infected. Many of the people who develop infection develop prolonged neurological deficits and may never recover total brain function. So this is a serious thing. It's not just a little cold or fever. Now the secret is, we've now studied last year's epidemic in collaboration with Dallas County Health Department and their epidemiologists. We've done a big thorough study of last year. There's a statistic that we're now calculating called the vector index, and it's a complicated formula based on the mosquito surveillance. And we're now looking at that weekly. And when that goes above a certain threshold, it's virtually certain we'll have a big epidemic. But right now the county is trying desperately to treat abandoned or uncared for swimming pools, to encourage the population to eliminate standing water in their yards, because these are the common household mosquito around your house. It breeds in a bottle cap or a little piece of your lawn that remains wet too long. They can breed in just a sort of a wet ground. So you need to really be careful around your house to eliminate all standing water. But if all this fails and that vector index goes up in late May or June, that means it's too late now, we're going to have an epidemic. And that means the only solution at that point, that they will try increased ground spraying, but that probably won't work. What's going to happen is we'll do aerial spraying again in those parts of the county that appear to be affected, and that has always been effective in eliminating the threat immediately. But there's great concern, there's political pushback about aerial spraying of a pesticide. But let me just say the final comment. This is very safe. It's a very mild insecticide that is approved by the EPA for this purpose. In addition to being a mild insecticide that has very little likelihood of affecting humans, it is sprayed at it's called ultra-low volume spray. That is, there's a special spray nozzle on the plane that produces a fine mist that's microscopic droplets, microscopic in size, and they spread it very widely so that it's less than 1 ounce of insecticide per acre. So you can see it's a tiny, tiny concentration. And I actually stood out in it last year to see if I could detect it. And you absolutely can't see it, smell it, feel it, and I had no adverse effects. It is harmless to people, and there have been very thorough studies showing both immediate effects and long-term effects just don't occur with ultra-low volume spray. And that is life-saving. If we do that at the right time, we'll prevent the 30 deaths and the 4,000 cases of brain infection. So anyway, I just want to put that commercial out. You as informed citizens need to get involved and express your opinion. If we start having this, we need to speak to our political leaders. And by the way, I want to say our county commissioner, county judge, Clay Jenkins, has done an absolutely brilliant job in managing this and bringing rationality to the discussion. He's a brilliant guy who really listens and has mastered the science and is a great leader on this. So I want you to give him your support, and let's work together to try to prevent another catastrophe that we had last year. Okay, brief commercial.
Robert, can you buy an aerosol spray at Elliott?
Oh, I wouldn't spray my own house. And the reason for that is if you have to, when you spray, you only knock down the mosquitoes for a few days, and they come right back. They grow back up. They find places to lay eggs, and they come right back up. And so around your house, you have to spray frequently. And that's not the problem. It's the birds that are the problem. And the mosquitoes that get you, 80% of the mosquitoes are at the tops of the trees where the birds are, and they just circulate down periodically down where you're going to spray. So you're not going to be getting them, and you may actually select out a resistant strain of mosquitoes by doing it. So I wouldn't recommend spraying at your house. What you need to do is support Clay Jenkins in his decision making on, because if we spray aerially, we kill 80% of them at the tops of the trees. We kill them, they're gone for about a week, and then the birds all get well, and then there's no more transmission, there's no more virus. It's gone for the season. So that's the strategy. It works. It's been proven over and over again for malaria, for St. Louis encephalitis, West Nile encephalitis. It just works all the time. Expect it to work here. It's just there's a political concern. People are worried about spraying, and so there's a lot of political pushback. Yeah.
What about those home systems, though? Like
the home system that's automatically spraying your yard, I wouldn't do it, because what that's doing, you're constantly killing mosquitoes, and what you're going to do is select out resistant mosquitoes who will become resistant to the pesticides, and then the aerial spray won't get them when that's important. So I think it's, hope I don't step on a commercial toe here, but I think it's a waste of money. Also, I'm not sure I would want to, the aerial spraying is just 2 days, 2 nights, all summer. A very small concentration. That thing in your yard is going day in and day out, a very high concentration. Now, I'm not sure what that does to people. So I'm concerned about pesticide exposure. Aerial spraying is innocent. These other things are constant and a much higher concentration. Yeah.
So they plan to do this aerial spray this year?
Well, it's up in the air. Actually, the 20 taken off yet. So this is a decision of the county judge. He will, because he's the head of emergency preparedness. I think he has the responsibility himself. The county commissioners court, the county, they advise him on that, and they may vote on it. And the mayors of the various municipalities within the county have something to say about it. So it's the American political process is involved, and so just support your leaders and pray that they make the right decision, because they're, particularly as older citizens, are most at risk. Okay, 3 years after the 91 Gulf War, Ross Perot came over to medical school, and to make a long story short, said what we need is an independent study from the government, because I understand the government's going to cover this up, and we need an independent study from the government, and you genius doctors will do it, I'll pay for it. And I'll run political interference for you. I heard I'll pay for it. I should have run political interference. I should have heard I'll run political interference, because that was a much more important thing. We ended up basically doing a long series of studies, first funded by Ross Perot and then by the U.S. Army with Ross Perot's encouragement, and have figured out what the disease is. There really is a Gulf War illness. It's caused by brain damage, and brain damage from pesticides, nerve gas, sarin nerve gas, and a medicine that we gave our troops to protect them from nerve gas. And ironically, interacted with the nerve gas and the long unintended consequences. This cocktail of chemicals then produced brain damage in about 25% of the force that we set over there. We set 700,000 troops in the most successful war in history. You remember the story? Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, expropriated the oil fields that we had great interest in, and so we invited him to leave. He refused, and so we sent in 700,000 troops in the largest movement of U.S. troops in U.S. military history, second only to the Battle of the Bulge, and that wasn't as far. We moved them halfway across the world in about 6 months, mounted a 5-week air war, a bombing campaign in Iraq to neutralize their forces, and then a 5-day ground war. You remember the left hook of the mechanized cavalry, and a 5-day ground war decimated the what's thought to be a very crack Iraqi army, just made them look silly and wiped them out, and achieved the goal in a 6-week period. It was with 150 U.S. deaths, most of which were friendly fire or accidents. So we probably inflicted tens of thousands of casualties on the enemy with 150 dead on our side. So it was an amazing victory. But while they were in the theater, during the 5-week air war and the 5-day ground war, our troops were becoming ill. And many of them went to their doctor stations and presented with at first fever. It looked like a flu. Fever, aches, pains, difficulty thinking and concentrating, and the doctors couldn't figure out what it thought it was an infectious disease, but that didn't turn out to be true. And by the time people were arriving back 4 months later in the States, 25% of the force were complaining of this mystery illness. Initial very good efforts to find out what it was failed. They couldn't figure it out. And so in 1994, the new Clinton administration decided, since they couldn't figure it out, let's just do away with it forever. And a presidential order was signed, and from then on it's been cover-up. So the government has basically said, we don't want research. We will pretend to do our own research to placate the veterans, but we're not going to really do anything serious, and we don't want you doing it either. And had it not been for Ross Perot, nobody would have. It would have been like Agent Orange over again. It would have been 30 or 40 years before anybody really figured out what was going on. By that time, they'd all be dying. So, for whatever reason, nobody really knows yet, but there was a whistleblower for the first time in December, a whistleblower who was a high-level epidemiologist with the Department of Veterans Affairs in the VA Central Office in Washington, resigned in protest and went public at a hearing of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and accused his supervisors in the VA system of trying to force him to falsify scientific data so as not to give any encouragement to veterans that there might be brain damage from chemicals. And he said this has been going on for 20 years, and he was just the latest person, whereas all the ones before have agreed to do that. So we now have appears to be a scandal in the VA of having probably the largest episode ever of scientific misconduct in the history of science, perpetrated by our Veterans Administration and the defense, some people in the Defense Department. But anyway, you know, government does strange things, but as Ross Perot told me one time, he said, look, this is a free country. And that means those bureaucrats have every right to do whatever they want to us, that we will not stop them from doing. You can just hear him say that. And so he put his money on that horse, and we did the research, and we studied a group of naval Seabees first, had them in several times, put them in the hospital, did all sorts of tests, and found out, sure enough, they had brain damage underlying the symptoms that they have that are so crippling. We then, in the last few years, with Ross Perot and then Kay Bailey Hutchison's great help, she's one of the real heroes of this, got us some substantial funding. We developed a whole new set of brain imaging tests, take the latest cutting-edge MRI techniques and so forth, and developed new diagnostic techniques really aimed right at this type of brain damage, which is very subtle, very difficult to define. And then did a large study. We studied 8,000 veterans by telephone survey, and then brought in the representative ones and put them through all these tests, and now we're publishing papers showing exactly what the problem is. And I believe the scientific process, getting the scientific papers out, showing what this is, in peer-reviewed journals, will eventually turn the government around, invalidate that old presidential directive, and get the VA on board taking care of these veterans, making the diagnosis, and hopefully treating them. And that's a summary of where we are. But the big question is then, what caused this? I mean, can you imagine we send the healthiest of the healthy, the crack troops over there? You know, in any military unit, those of you who have been in the military, you know, when they're about to deploy your unit, if there's somebody in the unit has just developed diabetes, or maybe is hepatitis positive, but feeling okay, or for some other reason or maybe just had an appendectomy or something, and they're not just in tip-top shape, well, you transfer them to a non-deploying unit, and you only send over there the fittest of the fit, okay? And yet, 4 months later, these guys are coming back. 1 out of 4 of them are so impaired they can't function. They've got chronic fatigue. They can't get up in the morning because they're so weak. They've got chills. They don't sleep. They've got chronic diarrhea alternating with constipation that they never had before. And this goes on the rest of their life, and they go to the VA. The VA doctors say, well, there's nothing wrong with you. The people up there in Washington say there's nothing to this, so go home and go back to work. And that's where we've been. So the big question is, what caused this? It's really thought that if we can prove the cause, this will be convincing to the doctors of the VA, and they just won't tolerate them under their Hippocratic oath. They won't tolerate that kind of guidance from the politicians above them. So that was right. So for the last 15 years, while doing all the medical research, I've been working with an intelligence expert from Washington, who was a Vietnam veteran, and then he had a career in the Secret Service as an analyst. And then when he came out, he was the head staffer for the first Senate committee that looked into the Gulf War illness in 1993 and 94. And he did the first really up-and-up investigation. And he was an intelligence analyst, so he had access to all the records. And he concluded, he reached a conclusion back there in 1994 and presented it, but it was ignored and purposefully swept under the carpet. And so about 15 years ago, I started working with him, and about 8 years ago, we became very serious about this and worked together. And I have to say, a lot of what I'm going to show are things that Jim Tooth, what Jim found in the archives and so forth. So let's look at the slide. So this was the 1991 Gulf War. There, okay. And, we had a big tank battle, but a lot of concern about chemical nerve gas. In fact, on the 3rd day of the air war, there was a 5-week bombing period, and the 3rd night we bombed some chemical weapons facilities. And here's the map. Here's the Persian Gulf. Here's Iraq, Saudi Arabia. And these dots down here are each one of the little company level unit of our army on the 3rd day of the air war. Okay? And here's the Persian Gulf. Here's our troop positions in northern Saudi Arabia. There's Kuwait, and there's Iraq, and there's Baghdad and Star. Okay? Well, just west of Baghdad, there were 2 big chemical weapons production and storage facilities named Mufana and Fallujah. You've heard of Fallujah more lately. Fallujah 1, 2, and 3. These were big chemical weapons research, production, and storage facilities. And they had warehouses with 50-gallon drums of oily sarin, nerve agent, stacked to the ceiling in these big warehouses. Something like 100 tons of sarin, oily reagent. And on the 3rd night of the air war, we bombed those. And the next morning, bombed them right up there with the purple thing. And the next morning, or the next late morning, early afternoon, 10,000 nerve gas alarms started going off in almost every unit down here. Now this is 600 kilometers. So after the war, all the military and the civilian review panels concluded that couldn't have been from the nerve gas up here because that's too far. Had it gone that far overnight, it would have killed everybody in between, so it couldn't have happened. Okay, so they disregarded that and said, we don't know why the alarm started going off that morning, and since we can't find out why, we're going to call them false alarms. And so the manual said, alarms go off, nobody dies, you don't know where it comes from, it's got to be false alarms. That's what the manual said. So you know how the military is, it's false alarms. And that's the way it's been for 20 years. Okay, so this is Jim Toots' theory. Here is the ground down here, and this is the first 200 meters. At night, the first 200 meters down by the ground, the cold, and this was in the winter, in January, the cold air settles at night and forms a very viscous layer down first 200 meters at the surface, and that resists movement because it's cold and viscous and doesn't move, and so that's why most winter nights, unless there's a storm blowing in, most winter nights are calm. And air doesn't move. But if you go above that layer, then there are high winds called supergeostrophic winds that can blow things a long distance. And you remember the Chernobyl affair. When Chernobyl, the nuclear plant, blew up in the old Soviet Union, it blew the radioactivity above that boundary layer on cold winter nights, and the first radioactivity was detected in Sweden the next day. And that's because it went above the boundary layer. It didn't spread around in Russia. It went above the boundary layer and transited rapidly with these high-level winds. And then in the morning when the sun comes up, the layers mix, and it comes down to it was high up, but not near the ground. So this was our theory, that's what happened. This shows you an actual explosion of the type of bombs they were using, and this is about on the same scale. Actually, this is a smaller scale. So you see, it blows it up like that, and we believe it blew it up above. They were using 2,000-pound bombs and blew up these warehouses and so forth, and blew it above the boundary layer. The supergeostrophic wind blew it long distance. And so here's another picture of it. As day turns into night, this layer forms, and if you blow it above there, then these winds blow it over, and then the next morning when the sun comes up, the layers mix, and it comes back down to the ground. That's the theory. Okay, the question is, could we prove that? And they disqualified that theory back in 1994. So Jim and I thought about it, worked on it, and Jim went through the archives and finally came up with the evidence, which we published in December in the Scientific Journal. First of all, he found that, well, you can't really see this, but these are the weather charts that were there from that night, from the third night of the air war. And I don't know if you can see, probably can't, but there's a low pressure here and a high pressure here, and this is where they bombed. So that means the winds will be going this way. They'll be going from north to south, which is just the right direction. Okay? Here, you've got to look carefully, but if you see, this dot up here is the nerve gas factory. This orange dot is the nerve gas factory, and this green dot down here is our troop location, where I showed you. Here is at 8 o'clock at night, and with just normal clouds, and then at 3 in the morning, you see this big thing spreading from right here, okay, and then by the next afternoon, it's spreading down close to our troops here. And here's another satellite. This is the weather satellite picture. Here's another satellite showing the same thing from before it happened. Here's the clouds beginning to arise. It's further and further down and further down. There's no cloud here. Then after the bombing, there's a plume that's coming up. It's spreading further until it reaches our troops the next day. Now here's a high resolution picture of the best picture that we blew up for this picture, for this paper. This is the Persian Gulf right here. So this is Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. Right here is the middle of our troop positions, which are right here. Okay? And these are the two warehouses that were bombed. If you see this dirty yellow cloud right there rising from that bombing, and then as it goes south, spreading like this, And you can see it in other pictures progressing sequentially over that night and getting larger and larger as it fans out down here and finally reaches our troops. And then if you see this linear streak here, this is a weather front, a stationary weather front. It turned out that weather front was probably caused by the huge volume of bombing that had gone on for the several days before that. It produced so much hot air and debris that it produced a stationary weather front. So the cloud then of the fallout debris from the chemical weapons plants that were bombed ran up against this weather front that was right over our troops and held this cloud there for a week. Here is the same pictures in black and white. This was before the explosion. This was when the explosion began. The next day, see the cloud. This is the one I blew up a second ago. See, there's the cloud going to our troops. Here it merges with this weather front, and that weather front just stays there. This is each day. Stays there for a week, and then finally dissipates. And during that time, nerve gas alarms were going off all over the place. People were told to go to Mach 4, put on your impervious rubber suits and your gas mask. This is a nerve gas attack, but nobody ever died. But they believed it at the time. And at the time, there were chemical weapon experts from the old Soviet Union who had been hired by, they were Czechoslovakian university scientists who were chemical weapon experts, the best in the world because they had been the Soviets' center of excellence for chemical weapons, offense and defense. And so the Saudis hired them to be their eyes and ears for chemical weapons because they knew the U.S. Army wouldn't tell them. So they had their own experts there. Well, they, right here on this day and this day and this day, they were detecting sarin nerve gas in the air and identifying it definitively. And they were in their impervious rubber suits, shaking with fright, and looked out the window, and there were American GIs playing baseball with their alarms going off and just being told to ignore it. Now, it was fallout, so it was not in concentration enough to kill anybody, so nobody died immediately of nerve gas poisoning. And that led also to the view at the time of certain experts that this wasn't really nerve gas, it was false alarms. But in fact, with this evidence, we now know, yes, it was nerve gas. They were being exposed, but it was to low-level exposure. If you know anything about nerve gas, these organophosphate nerve gases, when you're exposed to them, they go through your skin, into your blood, they go through your breathing, if you're eating, they go through your food, they enter your body as if you were just transparent. They go right through into your body, into your blood, and then they're attracted to fat, because they're highly fat soluble. Well, between your ears, your brain is just a big glob of fat, and it just soaks that nerve gas up, and it doesn't come out. It stays there. And so, so about 25% of the troops just made them sick, but 75% didn't. So in part of our research, we looked up what's the body's defense against nerve gas and pesticides. And I think I talked about this last time. There's a gene called the PON gene, and this gene produces an enzyme in your blood that destroys nerve gas and protects you. Destroys pesticides and destroys natural chemicals in the environment that are like pesticides. That's where it came from, of course. I don't think there was any nerve gas in the primordial soup, but something like it. Or I like to say, or maybe God knew the end of the story when he made it, or whatever. But anyway, it's there, but the problem is about 25% of people have a difference in that gene that makes it not so effective against nerve gas. And it turns out that's the people, the 25% who have Gulf War illness. So this genetic finding plus now this weather evidence and the photographic evidence, the visual picture. This is not a computer model that can be repeated. This is direct visual evidence of exposure from whatever was up there at that nerve gas factory. Now, this is a statistical graph looking at the height of these bars shows you is the risk, the level of risk of getting Gulf War illness if you were a Gulf War veteran as a function here on the x-axis of how many times you heard the nerve gas alarms go off. So we ask, how many did you hear nerve gas alarms go off? If so, how often? How many times? And if you heard it just once, if you didn't hear it at all, you have this basically no risk of it. If you heard just once, you have this risk. If you heard it up to 20 times, it's this. If you heard it more than 20 times, you're here. And this is the most severe illness. These people are just unable to function, and look at their risks. These are minimally ill, and these are sort of in between. This is called a dose-response relationship in research, and this is a hallmark of causal association. So we now have the visual evidence, the genetic link that connects the disease with a particular product, a particular threat, and we have the epidemiologic evidence connecting with the chronic illness that the veterans have. So, in summary, what we have here is, on the third night of the air war, we bombed their chemical weapons storage and production and storage facility near Baghdad. It blew it above the boundary layer, it transited rapidly overnight, and came to Earth the next morning, set off 10,000 nerve gas alarms that went off periodically for the next week. And the people who were there, who were genetically susceptible to nerve gas, it went into their body, up to their brain, and they now have Gulf War illness. And few, if any, have recovered. They still have it. That's it. So that's really where we are. We've now got the profile of the illness. We know that it's brain damage. We know the brain is not functioning. That's basically the symptom. We now can prove why it's there. And the next step is we've got to get the government now behind this to help us develop a diagnostic test and then a treatment. So, because I think there's a good possibility, given what we know about the nature of the disease, that this could possibly be reversed. It may be just a chemical complex of some kind that could be undone. And if so, we could take 175, 200,000 Gulf War veterans who are basically disabled now and turn them back into productive citizens, which is what we like to do. So that's the update for this year.
Thanks for coming,
Sure,
Dr. Hood, but this pattern that the VA has developed of denial, like they did with Agent Orange and so on, why are they so unwilling to acknowledge when these GIs are damaged? Do you
That's
have
a very
any
good question, and everybody asks that, and I ask that, and I worked on this for 19 years, and mostly full-time, and I don't know the answer to that. My best guess is this, and I'm only speculating. First of all, I think this came from very high up in the government. I suspect, and I'm only guessing here, it was either a presidential-type decision about priority of spending, or it was the national security apparatus feeling this is too dangerous to divulge it. Telling our enemies that low-level nerve gas could incapacitate an army. We don't want to, or maybe it's going to hurt recruiting of an army, an all-volunteer army. I don't know. You can imagine a lot of reasons. On the other hand, to make a decision that you're going to say 175,000, 200,000 of our best troops who served our country in an all-volunteer army are just expendable, we're not going to lift a finger to help them, we're going to deny them when they come to VA, seems like a heartless, un-American thing to do. And I think if you ask any American on the street, are we going to take care of our veterans regardless of what the consequences? I think you can get a 99.9% opponent. So I don't know the answer. Those are my speculations.
Dr. Haley, we heard the alarm so much that we were ordered to take the batteries out of our innate alarm detector. And when I saw several groups of camels dead with no entry or exit wounds, those were things that were kind of making me wonder that if it was chemicals or not at that time.
Yeah, there were lots of eyewitness accounts of dead animals, dead sheep, dead camels, dead flies. So about seeing before suddenly the next morning there was dead flies everywhere. And you're right. I mean, just about every veteran soldier who served there. I mean, it was common knowledge. We bombed it. We bombed across on the border, and the next morning that everything went off. So everybody just knew it was from our bombing. In a
sick, and once you get there's no cure, 2.5 years later you're dead.
Right.
And there's really been an uptick in this area, and one thing that's really come on is veterans are a strong part of that population. Correlation?
Yes, no doubt about it. Let me just say that as part of our investigation of Gulf War illness, which is brain illness with symptoms, that are very troublesome and kind of disabling, but it's not fatal. People who have it are living going to live a long time with this disabling condition. But, and this is 200,000 people, but out of that large wave of mild, I shouldn't say mild brain damage, it's not mild to the people who have it, but non-fatal brain damage, there's a group of those who came back with Gulf War illness. So they had exposure and brain illness. Starting about 4 years later after the war, a small number then blossomed forth with Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is a progressive paralyzing disease that, as you point out, usually with an average of 2 years, the person becomes totally paralyzed and dies, or stays on a ventilator for 5 or 10 years before their body just gives out. So it's a horrible disease. We detected that in 1998 and did a study in collaboration with some of the ALS victims and their families, and we found that the rate of occurrence of that was 4 times higher than you would expect in the civilian population of that age distribution. So that proved it was related. The VA undertook a study. Actually, they did some dirty tricks to try to stop us from publishing that, and in the meantime did their own studies to disprove it, but it ended up proving it. The 2 papers came out in the same journal the same month, same issue, back to back. Okay, so it's proven, and now all veterans with ALS are service connected automatically, and they take care of them.
Wow.
Before that finding, basically I had several of my ALS patients who were basically crawling around the floor because they couldn't get a wheelchair. Crawling around the floor with 2 little girls, 3 or 4 years old. It was just horrible. But now the VA is taking care of them. And see, again, that shows, I think the lesson from that is that you can get good scientific studies that are published in top-rated journals, you go through peer review and pass. I think eventually that wears down the politics, because the doctors in the VA are not ill-meaning, but all they hear is from their superiors, but once they read this in the journal, I'm firmly convinced that you're going to have the doctors now taking control of this and telling their supervisors above them to get lost. They're going to take care of them if we've got an answer. Looks like we're going to have to come up with the answer, though. Okay, well, I think that's it.
Thank you for updating us on an illness that affects way too many of our veterans. So thank you very much. In honor of you being here today, we will be placing a book in the Preston Hollow Elementary School. So thank you very much.
So that's the alma mater of my 3 children.
Great. While George Burrell is coming up to listen for a test, would you please rise? I want to thank our guests for being here today. Mike Morris, back in the house.